Well, in other news, judgment reserved in what's been the big legal action today. President Cyril Ramphosa, his urgent application to prevent former President Jacob Zuma from pursuing a private prosecution against him. The full bench, 3 judges hearing Ramphosa's case, will now deliver judgment on Monday morning. Our senior political reporter, appropriately enough, Ziyanda Ngcobo, was in court. Ziyanda, good afternoon to you. I mean, this is all politics. I mean, this is just, it's a former leader of the ANC against a current leader of the ANC. It's a former president against a current president. Yes, it's law, but it's all politics.
And very unprecedented at that. And I think we'll only be able to start unpacking the implications of having these 2 bulls in one crawl, really, once that judgment is handed down, because it will ultimately determine whether or not President Cyril Ramphosa sits in the dock next Thursday, the 19th of January. Well, that's what Dalimpofu was saying, that the president is equal, just like the rest of us, before the eyes of the law. But the law is representing the president in the form of Ngwako Maneshi, saying that, well, there are several issues that needed to be dealt with. Remembering, Stephen, of course, that this was an urgent court interdict to halt. The first part was to halt, this matter sitting next Thursday. The second part is to have the summons, dismissed. And really, the argument here is that at a prima facie level, this matter of a private prosecution is unlawful because of that those 2 those certificate of non-prosecution certificates that were issued then by the KZN Director of Public Prosecutions, and the process of a private prosecution that needs to be followed, including the security deposit, for an example, but also the wording of the certificate of non-prosecution, these certificates of non-prosecution, as it should say, that were sent by Elaine Zunga. I mean, at some stage there was an argument about anyone involved in this matter, and the issue of who is anyone and how does the president then become a part of this issue. So Advocate Maneshi actually explaining that and the privilege that a private prosecution actually is.
He was not even aware of the commission of the crime on the 9th of August. And the commission of the crime was completed at that time. The only time he becomes informed of this is in the letter of Mr. Zuma of the 1st of August asking him to investigate. Even the investigation is about particular matters. It's to investigate how, as he puts it, to investigate the ethics of the conduct of these prosecutors or officers of the court. And what the president does on the 25th of August is he doesn't ignore this. He says, he writes back to the president, to Zuma, and says, this is a very serious matter. I'm referring this to the Minister of Justice because it is the Minister of Justice that is responsible, that they have oversight, jurisdictional authority over the FDA. And I'm referring it to the LBC because you are also implicating professionals in private practice. So the president does something. Immediately, in public, there will be argument about whether you can ever get a conviction when the president took steps of that kind. And remember, the president is not an authority that investigates crime under our constitution. Can you imagine if any minister can receive a request to investigate crime and they're eavesdropping in your telephone calls and investigating crime? They are authorities that the constitution says are law enforcement agencies that investigate crime.
Ziyanda, we're all aware of the timing of this. So 15th of December, just before the ANC's conference, is when this landed, I presume on your WhatsApp before mine, from the Jacob Zuma Foundation. It's all about, in a way, the ANC's step-aside rule.
So a very interesting argument was made by Advocate Dalimpofu to firstly talk about the fact that if the argument of personal harm, which is one of the arguments that the president has made on the basis of urgency, why is it then that President Cyril Ramphosa on the 16th, if he believes that this was going to jeopardize his prospects of becoming president again, why didn't he file an urgent court interdict on the 16th, the 17th, the 18th, or the 19th? So the issue of the step-aside rule within the ANC being invoked because he's criminally charged, insofar as personal harm, whether or not the urgent court interdict is granted, is neither here nor there, because the personal harm, even though it may not already have been instituted, remains there because the step-aside rule remains in place regardless of what the court says. And he was basically saying the court should actually not venture into that. And ironically, he was quoting what the court had said to former President Jacob Zuma in the arms deal case, where which was formerly known as Thales, when he was seeking a permanent stay of prosecution. The Supreme Court of Appeal, when he was trying to use the spy tapes as a way to explain the motive, where the Supreme Court of Appeal said, actually, well, the motive becomes irrelevant if there's enough, evidence before the court to be tested. However, then the issue of, the civil court managing this matter over the criminal court, because of course within a civil court you're dealing with, balance of probabilities, whereas in the criminal court you'll be dealing with beyond reasonable doubt. So let's listen to what Ramaphosa had to say about this issue of personal harm to President Cyril Ramaphosa.
We were actively wanting to refrain from getting into this thing about the ANC conference and step-aside rule and what have you. But they keep on forcing it on us because they raise it in their correspondence, they raise it in their papers. I have one thing and one thing only to say about it. The entire step-aside debate is actually evidence that this court should not grant this relief. Why? Because on their own version, the so-called step-aside rule kicks in, so the harm related to the step-aside rule kicks in once you are charged. Right? So that has happened already on the 15th of December 2022. So let's assume for a minute this court grants this relief that is being asked for here. The step-aside rule will still be operational.
Ziyanda, if I've understood this correctly, and I'm fairly certain I'm going to get a phone call from someone saying that I haven't, but if I have understood it correctly, this is essentially a claim that the President, because he is the President, failed to do his duty and therefore is guilty of a criminal offence. I can't think of a similar case like this. There have been plenty of cases. I mean, do we need to look at the person who brought this private prosecution in the first place? There have been plenty of people who have held a government position, have been accused of doing the wrong thing. None of them have been criminally charged. So
this was exactly one of the questions, and it was first Judge Molahleli who posed the question then, to both Ramaphosa and in particular, what was asked. In fact, it was the initial justice who jumped in there to say, well, can you do that? Do you think that a public official can be charged for not doing their job? And Ramaphosa said, yes, absolutely. And then, one of the other justices then jumped in to say, after he made the example of, perhaps if I take a bribe and then it's reported to me and I don't do anything about it. And then, the other justice was then saying, well, actually, that is different because that is a clear breaking of the law as opposed to someone just not acting or their clear ineptitude in a particular matter. So Ramaphosa basically saying that it's important that the president be charged in his capacity as president, citing the fact that former President Jacob Zuma had written a letter to the president asking him to intervene. And this is when the president's lawyer responded to say, first, what happened to the principle of separation of powers? Two, the issue of being an accessory after the fact also then became a matter that was bandied about by the two councils, because the debate there was then, the president only became aware of this alleged crime of the leaking of former President Jacob Zuma's medical records on the 25th of August when he wrote to them, and then through process he referred it back to Justice Minister Ronald Lamola as well as the Legal Practitioners Council, which are the relevant authorities. So, Advocate Mansha saying that by process, even by thought, the request to have the president personally intervene through his office is actually quite odd, because there are law enforcement agencies that are mandated to do that.
Ziyanda Ngcobo, thank you. By the way, I've been reminded by a learned friend that there may be one example of a public official who's been charged criminally, and Badabile Dlamini. But more of a complicated case because there was a perjury case there. Ziyanda Ngcobo, our senior political reporter, appropriately enough, in court for the case of the president against an ex-president, was that the other way around.